Hello and welcome to SFDC Sessions for the week of September 28th, 2020. My name is Alisa Carroll and I'm editor-in-chief of Henry Magazine. This week we are so thrilled to be debuting a new edition of Henry, which takes on a new life as a website. Through this medium, we're thrilled to be able to reach more of you and to be reporting in real time on everything happening in the San Francisco design world and beyond. The name of the issue is California Spirit, and we hope that will be a rallying point for the passion and creativity and resilience that all define California design at this moment. In that spirit, we are thrilled to welcome two very special guests this week, Gary Hutton and Charles de Lisle, who of course are so deeply respected for their mindful and innovative work. Gary Hutton needs no introduction. He is a leading statesman of West Coast modernism and is known for interiors that are driven by conceptual thinking and wildly innovative materiality. Charles de Lisle is one of the leading lights of the next generation of designers and was named by Architectural Digest to its top 100 list this year. Charles creates truly soulful spaces that reflect his passion for craft and his deep sense of narrative. As always, our many thanks to the San Francisco Design Center and to Rhonda Hirata for giving us this platform for education and for the exploration of the world of design. One of the reasons we were so thrilled to have both of you here together today is because I always felt like there's a real simpatico in the sensibility in the work that both of you do. It's so sort of cerebral and individualistic and driven by materiality. And Gary, you were sharing a story about seeing Charles's work for the first time that really spoke to that. Would you mind sharing that story?
Yeah, not at all. You know, it was in a showcase, and golly, it's so long ago, I don't remember, you know, my mind is, but I remember walking into the room and Charles, you had done the fireplace surround in like a sandblasted or etched mirror with some rope or something. And I thought, who is this guy? This is so great. The materiality is so thoughtful and different and cool. And I was like, okay, I need to know who this guy is. So that was kind of how I found out about you.
I think that was in 2003. That was the 2003 show house.
Well, and you know, one of the through lines as well is you both obviously came from fine arts backgrounds and have this real passion for materiality, whether it's organic or industrial. It's always something, you know, very, very unique. And Gary, you obviously studied at UC Davis under Manuel Neri and Robert Arneson, and then earned your MA at CCA. And Charles, you studied as a ceramicist, and then also, you know, have been a welder and a furniture maker yourself. So may I ask, how does that consciousness of craft inform your interior design? Gary, do you mind if we start with you?
No, not at all. Well, let me start by with a little story. And I think that it is kind of the essence of craft and how I go about things, and I think, Charles, you do too. And there was Isamu Noguchi was doing a garden in Southern California, and he bought and brought in this gigantic boulder and was going to bury 3/4 of it. And the developer who was paying for all of this was like, well, you know, like, I paid all this money for this giant boulder, you're burying 3, why? And Noguchi said, because you will know if it's not there. And I think that that's kind of the essence, is that we both, sorry if I'm stepping on your toes, Charles, but I think we both go about this in a way that comes from something that is different than like sort of the facile picking out of a cute fabric, but that there is something more to it, and that people who come into an interior that has that kind of root, you feel it in a way that you don't when you just go into something that's pretty.
Yeah, definitely. And I love a cute fabric, but by all means. But yeah, I think that I agree that the what always has driven me is kind of maybe what that, you know, I actually saw in your work when I was emulating stuff when you saw my work and back in the day. And I think, you know, I always was attracted to stuff that had some kind of like more deep vibration. I don't know how to explain it, you know. And I think that that's a really good story about, you know, how does a material make you feel something? And it could be shiny and glass, it could be, you know, beautifully woven and put in a context where I, you know, for me, like it's when it's sneaky, like you know, this concept of the rock, you know, it's a perception that you get after you think that you know what's going on, and then you realize, oh, actually, this is not. It was there in front of me, but then it kind of caught me by surprise that this was done in this way. And to me, that's like the goal in a way, because I love the story of telling those surprises, and to me, that's what kind of makes a space kind of come alive when you're in it. And it's always so hard to look at a photograph because it doesn't relate that fun, you know, quirky thing that the materials tell you as a story when you're in a space. And I think that I mean that's always what I've kind of been excited about. And
I remember one time going to the upholstery shop and seeing this crazy steel thing, and I was like, wow, what is this thing? Like, oh, that's Charles's. I was like, oh, okay. Okay, I figured. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm always looking at stuff that's kind of, I'm not intentionally trying to be edgy. I love looking at anything for a reference. And then the irony, I think, is that my brain is very traditional in the way that I process that information. And I think I still love a good interior, and I love something that's really beautiful. And sometimes those traditional structures are important for you to put the crazy shit in. I think that I don't know, that again, like that's what I love. And I feel like, Gary, you also do the same thing. Like there's always like this kind of really you know, like cool little push in everything, that there's something that doesn't feel like you understand like where that came from. And those iridescent tables you were making at one point out of, I think they were just plastic, right? I still wish I had one of those. I was obsessed by those. And I just love also the kind of funny rainbow pony, you know, inserted into this beautiful dialed in, you know, tailored room. Like to me, like that's the whole point. Like that's the exciting part.
Charles, one of the things that you just said that I think is really, really prescient here is that in order for these things to work, that there really is a grounding in sort of traditional understanding of how people work and do things in similar fashion, and they're comfortable doing those things because of the way things are set up. And knowing how people move and act and behave is sort of the foundation of a successful interior. And then you take that and then add some kind of other oddball thing that maybe just throws it off a little bit. We're just finishing up a project now where the architect, it's in a high rise, architect did this very like structured, symmetrical rooms, and it was all very thoughtful and nice, but it felt static to me. So I had them install the hardwood floors at 8 degrees off of square. And actually, the architect took client to lunch to try to convince her not to do that. But you enter and there's a hallway, and the boards kind of go off to the left ever so slightly, and you don't see it, but you feel it when you come in, and there's something dynamic about that space that wasn't there before.
So in this issue of Henry, we are focusing on a California design legacy, in particular, obviously, in the context of the 70s revival that's happening at the moment. And we wanted to hone in, if you don't mind, on 2 projects you're working on. Charles, you're doing the redesign of the Lodge at Sea Ranch, which is extraordinary. And Gary, we were hoping to speak with you about the work you did on the Marx House, which is an A. Quincy Jones project, obviously developed by Joseph Eichler. And both of these projects came to be around the same time in the mid to late 60s. So Charles, do you mind if we start with you and talk a little bit about the Sea Ranch Lodge project. Would you mind walking us through that and kind of sharing how you're staying true to the original sensibility while bringing your grooviness to that space?
Well, actually don't know if I'm bringing any grooviness to it, and I think that for me is like super satisfying in a way. I think it's a project that I am beyond excited about, mainly because it's something I've referenced my whole career and looked at since I was a little kid. I mean, it was just when it kind of happened, I remember seeing it out in the world, and it really changed how people looked at architecture and how architecture can sit within a landscape, and even just the fashion of a contemporary shingle style, which I grew up in Massachusetts, so I was actually very aware of the shingle style being around it and kind of getting interested in it when I was younger. Like I liked houses and architecture and kind of started studying it on my own when I was probably like in 6th or 7th grade. And the Sea Ranch kind of was in that world already and was super fresh. You know, this idea of these really clean boxes that kind of told a story inside and outside in a different way than what I was experiencing on the East Coast was fascinating. And so for me to be able to help kind of carry that story forward is a really big deal. And so it's been a challenge to figure out how do you update a building and not let anyone know, because there's, something built in the mid 60s doesn't meet any current code that is required for public buildings. So all of the building had to be reconfigured to put in wheelchair ramps and elevators, and there were access issues, lighting issues, just like electrical issues, energy consumption issues, like all these things needed to be addressed, which is super complicated in a building that is not made to do that. So we really spent most of our time finessing the way that the building was built and trying to stay true to this idea of how it felt, because we realized that this is the only public building at Sea Ranch that people can come in and walk in and out of and see what that story was that the people who came up with that idea had. And it's not even the original truth of that story. It's been modified so many times. So it's this romantic idea of what those buildings do, acting as just very simple barn-like structures that have a kind of funny, almost like alien nature in their environment, but then are completely tuned to the environment, the way they sit in it. The furniture is very, we're looking at it as almost this like transient product that could be in the building in a year, could not be in the building in 5 years. We're using very like classic, just like bentwood chairs and deck cushions. Like there's director's chairs, the $99 folding director's chairs. We're not using anything that's a design moment in the furniture almost, because our idea is that has always been something that has moved through the building. And that the most important part is like, does the vibe when you walk in feel like it's supposed to, right? Does it feel right?
Charles, that shows, I think, such a maturity as a designer and as an individual, your consciousness of the fact that you want to be in service to this place, right? You want to make sure that it's stewarded forward. You're not there, as you said, necessarily to say, here's my imprint. I'm going to put all these pieces in here that reflect me. I think as you said, by putting those pieces in an envelope, you're really trying to leave space for future design to move in and out.
Well, part of the story that I love that I reference in everything that I do is this kind of, it's a story that I learned in California, which is not just the cliche like indoor outdoor living, but it's actually, what does it feel like to be outside? What's the value of that? And here that's what's so cool about living here is like you can be outside almost all year round. And in what I've learned is that, it's important to feel what it feels like when it's cold and foggy, and to have to walk outside and go from one building to the other and do that. Like that is something that's very specifically learned that I am excited about, and I use in all of my projects. And so just this kind of just like Gary said earlier about, almost like the feeling of that floor being a little crooked that engages you is just, it's all the same thing, right? It's just like there's just something about this kind of funny world that California created that, you know, allowed things like cults and hot tubs and you know, yeah, all these kind of kooky things that the world looks at as being California, but they actually are very human, cool things that I think are important, that engage you in where you are. And I think that's, again, it's not about maybe me being mature, but it's me about like kind of respecting something that taught me something, right? And not bastardizing it, because I think that this is something that this is a lesson that is important for people to know.
So beautifully said, Charles, truly. And it's interesting to think about Eichler and, you know, maybe Donald Linden in the same mindset, because, you know, Gary, when I think of Eichler or A. Quincy Jones, I'm thinking mid-century, but obviously they were so of the, you know, the case study mindset of indoor-outdoor living that Charles was referencing. And the Marx House is such a beautiful example of that because it's sited right on the Belvedere Lagoon.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind walking us through that restoration a little bit?
Sure. Well, you know, it was a marvelous project. And when my client bought the house, she called and said, I just bought this house on the lagoon. Come take a look at it. And I, you know, pulled up and I knew it was a Eichler Jones house from the outside, but whomever had it previously had tried to turn it into a French Provençal thing, and they had replaced all of the sliding glass doors with, you know, French provincial doors with scrolly hardware, and had covered over all of the exposed aggregate floors with giant tiles that were glazed to look like pink marble, and they sheetrocked over all the wood ceilings and the skylights, and it was a mess. It was a complete mess. But the location was beautiful and the volumes were still there. And we walked into this little secondary guest bedroom, and she said to me, "Why is it that I like this room so much?" And I said, "Well, because it's the only one that hasn't been fucked with, you know, because it was a second room." And she was like, "You're right. So let's see what we could do to put it back." So we were able to get from Mr. Jones' widow the original plans, and went back to putting walls back in and reorganizing. We didn't do complete authentic restoration, but we used materials that probably would have been used at the time. Like, instead of plastic laminate counters, we used corian, and and we used travertine, which was a material there, but double paned windows and insulation and all of those kinds of things to make it livable in its current thing. And that was purchased as a home for her 60s and 70s art in general. So we tried to furnish it in a manner that spoke to that time period.
Right, there are amazing pieces by Keen Holtz and Larry Rivers and Vito Acconci that really enliven that space. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's funny. The end of the living room, of course, is facing right onto the lagoon. You've got a beautiful volume and lots of glass. And I wanted to use that George Nelson marshmallow sofa because it has a lot of transparency and you could see through it, see the water and all. And at the time, Herman Miller had not yet reintroduced it. So and this is like, before First Dibs and all. So I was on the phone a whole lot. I found a vintage one in Los Angeles. The client and I were there. We went to see it. And the store, it was hysterical. It was a vintage store and it was called Skank World. And the owner of the store was sitting in the back smoking big cigars, and my client was like, "I'm not going in there." And so I was like, "Oh, come on, you just no, absolutely not." She refused. I was like, "What am I gonna do? So and it was just actually, it was only about 3 weeks later that Herman Miller reintroduced that piece. But you could only get it in these colors. So we bought it and reupholstered it in the colors that we wanted.
Yeah.
It was a funny thing.
But it's really cool to hear as well that, you know, you brought in all of those references from your own sculptural training. Like there's a great little Arneson brick that's sitting in the living room. And it does really feel full circle. It's very cool. Well, these are both, again, such quintessential California spaces that I wondered if you wouldn't mind, you know, and Charles, you've already done this so beautifully, but would you mind sharing kind of what is so totally California, sharing about what's so totally California about that project, about Sea Ranch for you?
Well, I mean, I like that you use the word totally.
Right, well, I've been here for 20 years now, so.
I think that, you know, I mean, in and of itself, it's like the nature of that location is California. My nephew just came out for the summers from the East Coast and hung out, and, you know, I forget what it's like because I've been here long enough that when you drive out there the first time, it's kind of mind blowing. You know, you don't realize how vast and big everything is out here. And I think there's this weird thing that happens when you get over the Sierras, everything's bigger. So, you know, the kind of human intervention that is trying to be natural, but at the same time is very man-made and architecturally hard, just the same way that the coast is to me a fascinating thing that is also very California. We rent this little 1948 house that was it's built in Mill Valley by Don Emmons. He was actually William Worcester's business partner and part of with Worcester, Bernardi, and Emmons. And this was the house he built for himself when he got married. And we actually rent it from his son. So it's been rented since 1955. And we're the 5th renter. So it's all, I mean, again, like just super lucky. But yeah, so I get to live in this kind of funny cedar clad box as well. So maybe that's part of my understanding and why I might be a good fit for this, because I get the problems and the way it works.
We are just oozing architectural credibility today.
I don't know about that.
Maybe
voyeurism, not credibility. I don't know.
We got them all. Gary, would you mind speaking to that? Just to sort of how that project, you're a California boy.
Third generation,
born and bred, yep. So would you tell, what did that give you, or what did you find in that project that was quintessentially California for you?
Well, you know, as a child of the 60s and a young adult in the 70s, there was you know, we will change the world ethos growing up here, you know, the age of Aquarius and, you know, that kind of idealism. That was that, you know, modernism, and especially the modernist architects here in California, delivered a message of hope for the future. Not ironic, not pessimistic of the human condition or anything like that, but you know, I truly believe that through good design and architecture that we could change people's lives. And I think that we're now realizing that was and is true in our looking back at what happened at those times, and how much joy and understanding that kind of space can bring people who inhabit it.
Yeah. Oh, that's really beautiful to have a hopeful statement, particularly at this moment. And I wonder, you know, this is something we've been thinking about a lot, obviously, in the design community. It's like, how can we move that forward now, right? How can design galvanize community, build community? So that's a great message to have. Thank you. Thank you so much to both of you for being so thoughtful and shepherding all of our design legacy here. So many thanks.
Well, thank
You're
you.
welcome.